You know how you come up with a rough for a cover, and then you'll start to draw it because you think it's okay, and then you just before you finish it, you realize, oh, you know what? I have a better idea. I should just scrap all this other crap that's on the image and just draw this part, right? And I told him, like, I actually factor that time into the amount of time it takes. Yeah, I actually have a stage that I call just post-processing. So I actually try to set up a time after I've drawn something like a rough where I just play with it, right?
Yeah.
Where I just take out as much as I can.
That's very responsible of you, Michael Cho.
Well, I'm just older now, and I have 2 kids, so I had to learn about, I used to be the most irresponsible artist, right? Like everybody, I was lousy at business, and I was lousy at budgeting my time, and I used to say that I worked on passion and not on discipline, because discipline is boring. So, but if you're passionate about something, like a drawing, you could spend 14 hours on it and not be tired because you're really into it, right? But when I had my daughter, I did not have 14 hours. Yeah. So I had to learn systems of how to be efficient with my time. And the best way to make new habits that stick is to understand yourself.
Yes.
Right? So if you understand what you're about and what you really like, then you won't cheat on these habits, you know what I mean? If I went back in time and told 24-year-old me, hey dude, you should do it this way, I would never. 24-year-old me would still say, come on, get lost, right? Because it's that's the stuff you learn the hard way.
Yeah, I learned my trick was just do something every day.
Yeah, something, and whatever works is the right thing to do, right? So. For me, it's I know myself enough to know that I like drawing all different kinds of stuff, and if something gets boring, I can jump to something else, right? I like drawing superhero comics because the fact that when in my regular illustration gigs, sometimes I get that bank job where you have to draw 2 people shaking hands in suits, and I'm like, I can't. And it comes back with 30 revisions. Can you take the wrinkle out of the guy's head? Can you add a 3rd button to the suit? And it's yeah, I could do that. And then. So I just want to draw the Hulk punching something, and in comics they just don't edit you like they do in in advertising or an editorial illustration. Yes. Okay, so I used to draw children's books, okay, and I drew children's comics for 4 years, and in something that a lot of people don't know is that you can't do anything that's harmful in children's books anymore. So I would draw these scenes, and they would always go okay, they're on a bike, so they need elbow pads, they need helmets, and there should be a kid with a wheelchair in the background so that he's also included in the scene. And so it got ingrained into me for 4 years that every time I drew someone with a bike, they never jumped with their bike, they always wore elbow pads, they wore the helmet, and so one day I sent in a drawing for this comic on this page where I did some really heavy shadow work, and I put half of this kid's face in shadow, and they rejected it, right? And I was like, okay, I'm out. It's time for me to leave because this is actually stunting my growth. Right, so afterwards I tried to get into superhero comics, and I would show them to a friend of mine. I would show him these action drawings, and I was like, okay, here's Spider-Man leaping, and he'd be going, dude, he's 1 inch off the ground, right? This is this is the safest leap I have ever seen. Yeah. So for 6 months, I worked that out of my system where it was I'm going to draw stuff that's dangerous, something that looks like it's falling from a height, and he's not in a harness, and
guys shaking hands while they're riding bikes.
Right. So I did. So I did that kind of stuff, and then now, so flash forward to your question about what you do when you get bored is, because I can go back and forth, when I got sick of drawing the Hulk punching people, I told my daughter, I was like, kiddo, daddy's tapped out on superheroes, I can't draw another one. She was like, oh daddy, just quit. I was like, you know what, I'm going to stop drawing comics for a little while, I'm going to stop these cover work, and I'm going to go back to doing some illustration work, something that is a little different, that has it. And I did that, and then I got tired of drawing portraits of the Secretary of State, and I was like, okay, I'm ready to go back, to drawing comics.
Do a whole podcast about your NBA drawings.
Yeah. Well, that's just stuff I do for fun, right? So I prevent myself from being bored by always having a fallback. If I get bored of this thing, I can jump back and do illustration work, or I could try and find something more challenging somewhere that some other assignment will come along and I can turn down these ones.
Sure.
Someone?
Sure. I mean, the thing is, so one of the things is I get really bored easily. I have ADD. So I'll try and figure out something I can't do and try and do it. Like now I'm doing like something that's kind of much more realistic. And so I don't know if it's good or not,
Painting,
but
too.
it's
You're painting as well now.
yeah, and I like doing oil painting and stuff. And it's not so much that I think I'm going to be good at it, although that would be cool. But it's more just the idea that like you're using different muscles and everything. And actually, Michael, I brought up the idea of kind of keeping everything kind of to the bones. And I have to say, one of the best things that did happen to me is because I did so much cartooning work over the years, I find that even when I do more or less conventional comic books, or when I do oil paintings or something like this, I'm still thinking, or even when I'm doing writing, thinking about how can I keep something structurally as simple as possible, so I can have lots of details that you can stop and enjoy, but you have these basic punch you in the face, can't miss it fundamentals. I think it's because I have limited attention span myself.
Yeah, I think most artists do.
So I'm afraid of boring my audience, so I want to make sure that whatever I mean, it's also that sort of like if I have a punch, I'm thinking, how can I make this the punchiest punch I can?
Right.
So I think that's kind of helped even with the subtler work I do, that I start off with the really sort of idiot-proof, because I'm an idiot, sort of approach to things.
Yeah, I always say that my goal is to add nuance. So like I want you to know the difference between a club and a baseball bat, because theoretically they're the same thing,
Right.
but there really is a big difference, between this object that someone formed purposefully into something and a stick that's pulled off a tree.
Right.
And when someone's holding one, you get a different connotation from
Very much so.
that. The slight decisions you make speak volumes.
Oh, yes. I think also when I was at Toy Biz, because they were so cheap, they rented out actually half their floor to another company, a children's publisher. And so one of the editors ran into me in the hall and said, "Hey, you work at that toy company. Can you do like a book on how to draw cartoons?" And again, the answer is always yes. Yes, I can. So I went back to my desk and I did like a how to draw Magneto, or Magneto for the upper class people.
It's neato.
Yeah.
It is Nito. Thank you. It's
I agree,
Nito
it's
and exciting.
Magneto.
It's Magneto. No. And so one of the great things.
Magneto, he wears a red hat.
So one of the great things about doing that project, these two action and fantasy cartooning books, was it forced me to think about why I would do certain shapes and so on, which I thought about a bit before, but it really focused how I did that. And it really made me much more sensitive to the semantics, the semiotics, whatever. How much of what we do is basically manipulating people. Sorry. On the one hand, it's weird. So, I mean, our society is sort of visually illiterate. When it comes to reading, your average person's gone to how many years of middle school, high school, college, whatever, where you've had to read English classics, American classics, talked about onomatopoeia and symbolism and all that sort of stuff. There's no, for your average human being.
Not at West Mecklenburg.
I'm going to grant you that one.
That's my high school.
I hope so, and you're not just randomly
Yeah, it's
picking on
just a
some poor
random
school.
word, yeah. I'm picking on our rival.
Such a jerk.
Like,
Sounds like a Shelbyville idea. But there's no equivalent visually with art for your average person. So on the one hand, boo-hoo, someone can read a book and say, "Oh, it clearly used this and that," and I appreciate and respect that. People look at the art and be like, "It's a cool style." Like that's their only reaction, and that can be frustrating on the one hand. But the flip side of that is when a writer's manipulating audience, an audience is much more likely, or even a filmmaker, an audience is more likely to be aware of that. As a visual artist, I can much more easily and ruthlessly manipulate everybody, which I guess is wrong or something, but it's fun. When I do these paintings, reading the cartoony stuff, a lot of it I'm thinking almost just these abstract shapes. Big shapes next to small shapes, curves, and just playing with just the raw. Mark Hempel's a cartoonist who does an amazing job with that, which I really love. But with my stuff, whether it's cartoony or realistic, I always do sort of think about just how these different shapes on a purely, ruthlessly aesthetic level fit together, and that really helps with, giving my stuff whatever it is that it has that people like in it. And it's not, just the functional level of, does this look like, Spider-Man, or is this a beautiful woman or whatever, but just those raw, how do these different shapes break up and break down, and how does that feel?
Well, you're the even more, because you nailed it. He's using line a lot more often. So with line, you can accumulate shape,
Right.
and you have pared it down to largely like black ink. On
Yeah, it's
white.
mostly built on light, a lot of it. But like I get bored too. I when I started out as an artist, I was obsessed with line. I had no understanding of black spotting. Do you guys know what black spotting is? It's like figuring out where the black areas go in a comic. And I had no knowledge, and I couldn't figure out lighting. So I spent a lot of time learning that. So I would try to learn why these artists that I liked had such great black spotting. Like Dan Klaus had great black spotting. Charles Burns has great black spotting stuff, right? Jaime Hernandez does a different kind where it's not based on light, it's based on design, right? And I was like, where did these guys learn from? Because I could either learn from these guys or I can learn from the guys that taught these guys. And again, this is the desire to go right back to the metal, where you go, I want to learn from the guy that taught where this guy learned from. Let's say it's Dan Klaus, he learned it from Will Elder and Wally Wood. Where did Wally Wood learn it from? He learned it from Hal Foster and Milt Caniff. And then where did Milt Caniff learn? Oh, he learned it from Noel Sickles. That's the guy I'm going to learn from, because if I could track down his work, he's the closest to the first, you know what I mean? The first generation, the first guy to break down nature or reality, visual reality into hard black and white for comics, right? And so I was like, I can either learn the eighth generation version of this, or I can learn it from the original guy and then put my own spin on it.
That's why I'm such an American, because I learned from the junk food version.
Right.
And I mean that lovingly. Like, I think what makes, if my work is interesting at all, I think it spins on like elevating junk.
Right.
And that's a very American like approach to something, because even Canada seems a little more, even though they're right there, it's a little more visually literate.
Is
to
it?
me. It feels that way. It feels like visiting. It's a little closer to visiting, Toronto specifically. It's a little closer to. There's such a TCAF, for example. There's a public-funded comic convention.
Yeah, we actually do that. We have like grants for artists to put out comics and
Right.
stuff like
yeah,
that.
you could get a grant from the government to make comics.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. You can get like a big grant, like a $20,000 grant to make a comic.
And it doesn't seem like much, but it is.
It's a lot of money.
That's an artist's livelihood, a career.
Totally.
Whereas here, that's not really a thing.
Yeah.
And it trickles down. It really creates a.
One thing I do know about Canadian cartoonists is that almost all the creators I know, like there are a lot of them in Toronto, for example, they can all write, draw, ink, color, letter, and even package a comic. And I used to try to figure out why that was, right? And I think part of it, the only close thing I can come up with is a lot of these guys before they came to Toronto or something lived in a smaller town. And with the scarcity of the population, it was hard for a guy who just penciled, right, to meet an inker, right? So they learned to do it themselves, right? And so, but I find that knowledge also really helps. And I know that like a lot of the friends I have in Toronto that are cartoonists, even though we all work in different fields, some of them draw superhero stuff, some of them are animators, some of them are indie cartoonists who write autobiographical comics. They all appreciate each other's work and critique it with an open mind, because they don't just go, oh man, that stuff's, that's some lame-o art comic, and this is Spider-Man's where it's at, or this, oh man,
Right, because
Spider-Man.
Because they're educated in the processes of it, they can appreciate something that they don't.
Yeah, exactly. So I've always appreciated the fact that I can draw some superhero stuff, and then I can write a autobiographical comic and then show it to some buddies, and they'll give me an honest thing like, hey, you know what, this part works, this part doesn't. You should move this around. I lost focus around here. If you take out these 8 panels and merge it into one big panel, it would work better.
It's taken me a long time to admit this, but I think part of why I always wanted to dabble in other genres was because, one, I didn't see much division initially. Like if I liked Star Wars and I liked Superman and I liked Thor or whatever, and I liked this like novel I read, to me, I didn't see much difference in it.
Same
Then
here.
People in America like often would apply shame to the idea that like you're doing superheroes. They would be like, oh, it's just fun. They would sort of instantly dismiss it. And so I think my need to do other things was born out of like,
A shame.
I'm going to show you I can not only make a cool superhero, but I'm going to do this other thing that like completely proves to you that like I'm not a moron.
I don't feel any shame about doing comics, but within comics, I probably felt more shame for a while about
That's
doing
what I mean.
cartoony comics.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's weird within an industry built off of doing stuff for kids' entertainment and
Yeah.
with these cartoony concepts and ideas that over the last few decades, it's changed more recently, but there was a sort of fear of cartoonishness, of silliness, or anything like that.
Well, we really mortgaged, we as an industry, mortgaged our cartoony heritage for, they were basically, there was a period where I don't think anyone will ever openly admit to it, but both Marvel and DC were like, we have to position these things to be portrayed as realistic.
Oh,
Yeah.
they wouldn't admit to that? I think they,
Oh, they probably would.
probably people didn't have it tattooed on their
And I
heads.
think
I mean,
they
you
were
can't
more-
have a talking dog
Yeah, I
in
think
a
they were
comic.
more concerned with selling that this was possible to the people who were in charge of making films
Right,
than they were
right.
the audience. And the audience had never seen that before, so it was refreshing for them to see
Right.
realistic superheroes. And maybe the in a rare moment of self-awareness, comics in the last couple of years has realized like, well, the films already exist. We don't need those on paper.
Exactly. I mean, I would say hopefully what that means is not even so much, I mean, obviously there's always a pendulum swing in taste and everything, but not even so much that it's swinging more towards cartoony, it's just there's this growing awareness that there are a lot of different, there are a lot of different people who have money,
Yeah.
and they want different things, and you can keep getting money from one group, but at the same time, you can get money from other people too.
Yeah, exactly.
And give some to us,
Yeah,
of
yeah.
course. That's an important part of the process, where we get
Right
paid.
now, in fact,
Yes.
on your way out the door.
There'll be a can that's distributed around.
Well, just to end it on a hopeful note, I guess we could do some sort of self-promotion, or what rather than you sit up here and tell people, pitch people your ideas or whatever. What would you like to see yourself doing in the next, foreseeable future? Like if everything breaks, if everything comes up Michael Cho,
I am doing what I want to do, but no, actually, no. You know what? I had drawn comics in like my daughter drew more pages of comics than I had in the last year. She drew like 45 pages of
Wow,
comics.
that's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's amazing, right? But I was like, oh, she's drawn way more pages of comics. I felt like I should. And so I took a short assignment to draw some comics, and I was like, I'm gonna approach this completely fresh, as if I was just starting from scratch and not giving anyone any expectations of what I'm doing. And I love that so much that I was like, I'm ready to go back to drawing comics. So I'm budgeting my time accordingly and trying to make some time to make comics just for fun, like little 5-page little things, just idea stuff, and then my big plan that I actually want to do, I always tell people is I always say that I want to do a comic adaptation of Hamlet, which is like my favorite Shakespeare play.
it should star pigs.
It's the best.
That's, but the thing is that like my problem is that I see like manga versions of Hamlet, and there's so many in the marketplace that I was like, I'm gonna wait a few years, and when I'm 50, I'm gonna totally make this.
Well, everybody be on the lookout for Safety Spider-Man by Michael Cho.
Spider-Man.
Next year. What about you?
I
I mean,
okay.
there's the elephant in the room that you're basically doing
Drawing a book about elephants?
a Dark Knight.
Oh, yeah. So I'm doing a totally by accident. I was trying to convince DC to let me do something else. And so they ended up hiring me to work with Frank Miller on a Dark Knight spinoff, which is Carrie Kelly, who is the Robin of the Dark Knight universe.
Favorite Robin.
Mine too now. I mean, always. So there's that, and I'm excited to work on that, and I'm excited for everyone to read that, especially because I know a lot of people heard, Frank Miller is doing a book about a 13-year-old girl for 13-year-old girls to read, and I know a lot of people are like, wait, what? But no, you'll see. Everyone's gonna see. It'll be fun when people see.
All right, guys. I think we'll wrap it up. We've been going about an hour plus. So thanks to everyone. For
Thank you, everyone.
Ben, thanks so much. Thanks, guys. It was really
That
good.
was very, very cool. Yeah, I could talk for like another.
Exactly. I have to always
Let's do it at the bar.
remind myself.
Same place.